Hi, I'm Molly Johnson, and the book I'm going to read from today is the Book of Negroes. It is a great Canadian book. The lead character, the main character, her name is Aminata Diallo, and the book starts from the end. She speaks as an old woman in London in 1802. There must be a reason why I've lived in all these lands, survived all these water crossings, while others fell from bullets or shut their eyes and simply willed their lives to end. In the earliest days, when I was free and knew nothing other, I used to sneak outside our walled compound, climb straight up the acacia tree, sit way out on a branch, and look out at the patchwork of mud walls and thatched coverings. People were always on the move. Women carrying water from the river, men working iron in the fires, boys returning triumphant from the forest with snared porcupines. In those days, I felt free and happy, and the very idea of safety never intruded on my thoughts. I have escaped violent endings, even as they have surrounded me, but I've never had the privilege of holding on to my children, living with them, raising them the way my own parents raised me. I never managed to keep my own children long, which explains why they are not here with me now, making my meals, adding straw to my bedding, bringing me a cape to hold off the cold, sitting with me by the fire with the knowledge that they emerged from my loins and that our shared moments had grown like corn stalks in damp soil. Others take care of me now, and that's a fine thing. But it's not the same as having one's own flesh and blood to cradle one toward the grave. I long to hold my own children and their children if they exist, and I miss them the way I miss limbs from my own body.
The main character is just unforgettable. You'll never get this woman out from under your skin. Right from the beginning, we can see that she has the qualities she needs to survive and to thrive. But we never imagine for a moment the things that she'll have to get through.
I'm going to read now a couple of paragraphs that, to me, really illustrate Lawrence Hill's wondrous writing skills. He's able in 3 paragraphs to really tell us so much about this character, Aminata. Let me read to you. As an infant, I traveled on my mother's back. She slid me around to her breast when I cried for food and passed me among villagers, but usually I was swathed in red and orange cloth and rode low down on her back when she walked to market, pounded millet into flour, fetched water from the spring, and tended to births. I remember wondering within a year or 2 of taking my first steps why only men sat to drink tea and converse, and why women were always busy. I reasoned that men were weak and needed rest. As soon as I could walk, I made myself useful. I collected shea nuts and scrambled up trees to fetch mangoes and avocados, oranges, and other fruits. I was made to hold other women's babies and to keep them content. There was nothing wrong with a girl as young as 3 or 4 rain seasons holding and caring for a baby while the mother did other work. By my 8th rain season, I had heard stories of men in other villages being stolen by invading warriors or even sold by their own people. But never did it seem that this could happen to me. After all, I was a free-born Muslim. I knew some of the Arabic prayers and even had the proud crescent moon carved high into each of my cheeks. The crescent moons were to make me beautiful, but they also identified me as a believer among my Fulbe villagers. There were 3 captives, all unbelievers in our village, but even children knew that no Muslim was allowed to hold another Muslim in captivity. I believed that I would be safe.
For a story that is as wide in scope as Lawrence Hill's The Book of Negroes, it's astounding how it is told through one strong narrator. The narrator is so powerful that you'd expect her to completely dominate the story. Because the events are so big, she doesn't.
This is the part in the book where Aminata is stolen into slavery. She's with her mother. They're doing chores in the jungle. There was more rustling in the bushes. I looked for another sign of the hares. Nothing. We walked more quickly. Mama reached for my hand. If strangers come upon us, Aminata, she began, but got no further. From behind a grove of trees stepped 4 men with massive arms and legs. In the moonlight, I could see that they had faces like mine, but with no facial carvings. Whoever they were, they came from another village. They had ropes, leather straps, and knives, and an odd long piece of wood with a hole at one end. For an instant, they stared at us, and we looked at them. I heard the click of fear at the back of Mama's throat. I longed to run. Never could one of those thick, clumsy, loud-breathing men catch me, whirling and dashing and sidestepping among the trees, flying down the forest paths just as quick as an antelope. But Mama had the water skins balanced on a platter on her head, and I had some pineapples balanced over mine. And in that instant that I hesitated, wondering what to do with those platters, worrying that the fruit would tumble to the ground if I moved too awkwardly, the men encircled us. I think one of the images that has really stayed with me about this book is how brave Lawrence Hill is in speaking such truths about slavery and tribes, and how they sold each other out. People don't often say that out loud. It's a really interesting, sad thought to me, and it really grabbed me when I first read this book, and it stayed with me. A great story makes a great book, and if you can learn something from it, that to me is really exciting. That's part of what I love the most about the Book of Negroes, for instance, was I learned a lot about history and the history of my father's family and the travels. I love learning about stuff, and reading, of course, is one of the best ways to do that. I'm going to skip ahead now to the part in the book where Aminata starts her long walk to the coast. This is life after being captured. This is life now as an orphan, both her parents having been murdered. I lived in terror that the captors would beat us, boil us, and eat us, but they began with humiliation. They tore the clothes off our backs. We had no headscarves or wraps for our body or anything to cover our private parts. We had not even sandals for our feet. We had no more clothing than goats, and nakedness marked us as captives. But our captors were also marked by what they lacked, light in their eyes. Never have I met a person doing terrible things who would meet my own eyes peacefully. To gaze into another person's face is to do 2 things: to recognize their humanity and to assert your own. As I began my long march from home, I could not stop thinking about my parents or what had happened to them. In one moment, I could not have imagined life without them. In the next, I was still living, but they were gone. Wake now, I told myself. Wake now, sip from the calabash by your sleeping mat, and go hug your mama. This dream is like a set of soiled clothes. Step out of them and go see your mama. But there was only an unbearable nightmare that would not end.
Right from the beginning, she's taken from her parents. Her parents are killed in front of her. We know enough about her already that we're rooting for her and we feel there's hope there.
Aminata's experience is beyond most of our imagining. Could not imagine living through that kind of hell. It's compelling for us to read because we are drawn into her character, and it is her inner strength that carries the book forward.
I'm going to read you now the part describing a bit of the ocean crossing on this slave ship. I think Lawrence really was able to capture a real feeling here. A series of coincidences saved my life during the ocean crossing. It helped to be among the last persons from my homeland to be loaded into that vessel. It also helped to be a child. A child had certain advantages on a slave vessel. Nobody rushed to kill a child, not even a man-stealer. But also, the child's mind has elasticity. Adults are different. Push them too far and they snap. Men and women the age of my parents lost their minds on that journey. Had I been twice the age of 11, my mind might also have departed. On that slave vessel, I saw things that the people of London would never believe. But I think of the people who crossed the sea with me, the ones who survived. We saw the same things. Some of us still scream out in the middle of the night, but there are men, women, and children walking about the streets without the faintest idea of our nightmare. They cannot know what we endured if we never find anyone to listen. In telling my story, I remember all those who never made it through the musket balls and the sharks and the nightmares, all those who never found a group of listeners, and all those who never touched a quill and an ink pot.
There's so much to feed the senses in this book. I mean, a lot of it is horrific. The stench of human misery and death on the ships. And a lot of it is beautiful as well.
I'm going to fast forward now to a section in the book where our character, Aminata, has been sold into slavery to a man named Master Appleby. She also has taken on a lover, a husband, and together they have their first child. I carried Mamadou in a bright orange cloth slung along my back. His sounds and movements were just like a new kind of language, and I wanted to learn it all so I could give him everything he needed. I nursed him before he was hungry and vowed that I would never let him have a reason to cry. But when my son, Mamadou, was just 10 months old, I woke up in the middle of the night to his bawling. I rolled over to bring him close, to relieve his cries and all the pressure of the milk within me. My hand brushed against the bed of woven grasses, the bed, the air, my own body, nothing else. I opened my eyes. The crying was outside my little room now, out there in the night. I jumped up, dizzy, confused, and full like an unmilked cow, and there I saw Robinson Appleby put my baby into a man's arms up on a carriage. I ran forward to them. The driver whipped a horse and the carriage pulled forward. The whip struck again and the carriage sped away, and my baby disappeared into the darkness as fast as a falling star. I ran to Appleby, beating my hands on his chest. I slapped and hit him until he threw me down. "Bring back my baby," I shouted. He laughed in my face. "Bring him back." Too late. He's sold. Only got me £5, but he's a buck, and he'll grow and make his new master a fine profit one day. Dirt dug into my knees, and milk was streaming from my breasts. I never before wanted to kill a man, but I would have killed Robinson Appleby then. My heart and my body were screaming for Mamadou, but my baby was gone. Sold, sold, sold. Appleby would not say where. I love reading to my kids. I get great pleasure out of reading to them. I love explaining to them how books can take you somewhere else. And a trip in time or in travel to new places without leaving the comfort of your bed or your comfortable chair. I think reading is an amazing gift that you can give to your kids and enjoy yourself.
When you're writing a novel, one of the challenges is always to have a character who is active, not passive. Because if you want the reader to care and to feel empathy for your character, the main character, then they have to be able to act. They need to be able to bring change about and not just always be acted upon. Well, what a challenge when your whole book is about slavery, about people who don't have freedom to act.
I'm going to move forward now to Aminata's newest slave owners, the Lindo family, that recognized her intelligence and her ability to read and bring her to a library where they're studying maps. "Where are we?" I asked, pointing at the map. "This is British North America," he said, indicating a mass of land. On the edge of the land, right up against a huge swath of blue named the Atlantic Ocean, Lindo put his finger by a dot, beside which was the name Charlestown. And here, he said, is Africa. There were tiny words scribbled where the land met the water, but inland was mostly sketchings of elephants, lions, and bare-breasted women. In one corner of the map, I saw a sketch of an African child lying beside a lion under a tree. I'd never seen such a ridiculous thing. No child would be foolish enough to sleep with a lion. In another corner of the map, I studied a sketch of a man with a long-tailed animal sitting in his shoulder. "What's that?" I asked. "It's a monkey," Lindo said. This map of Africa was not my homeland. It was a white man's fantasy. "There is some lack of detail," Lindo said, "but now you see the shape of Africa." I said, "I've seen enough. After all the books I'd read and all that I'd learned about the ways of the white people in South Carolina, I now felt more than ever before that these people didn't know me at all. They knew how to bring ships to my land. They knew how to take me from it. But they had no idea at all what my land looked like or who lived there or how we lived." As we walked home, I felt a sense of despair. Not only had I lost my son and husband, but it seemed that I would never find my way home. I did not want to take the route of runaway slaves escaping to the Indians or the Spanish in the South. Hiding in swamps and forests would get me no closer to Africa. My only choice was to keep listening, learning, and reading. Perhaps one day I would understand the world of the white man well enough to discover how to leave it. It's the education of Aminata that saved her. Her parents gave her such gifts just in those first few years of her life. Her mother teaching her midwifery skills, and of course, in the end, learning to read and write. It was an education that saved her. I know growing up in my household, I was constantly told that education was the ticket out, and that is still a very strong message in a lot of communities.
The Aminata character, she is special both on the surface because she has gifts that not everyone in her situation does have, in that she has medical and linguistic powers. She also has gifts of insight.
At this point in the book, Aminata is asked by an abolitionist, Colonel Baker, to come to Nova Scotia. She's not sure why he wants her to come, but she's told that Africans are free in Nova Scotia. She later discovers that he wants her there to actually keep track of a book called the Book of Negroes. And it's sort of where this whole story comes from. "Why have you brought me here?" I asked. "Why are you telling..." He cut me off again. "You will spread the word among your people. You will help us register them. In due time, you will collect names, ages, and how they came to serve the British. We can only help those who have been behind British lines for a year." I turned to Waters. "All of this information about the Negroes," I said, "where will it be kept?" "In a special ledger," he said. "What will it be called?" "It will be called the Book of Negroes." "The Book of Negroes," I mumbled.
Lawrence Hill has written a brilliant historical novel through a whole lot of hard work and some really good writing. He has, in fact, captured a whole time for us. When we're reading the Book of Negroes, we are there.
We'll start again with our character, Aminata, living now in Nova Scotia in what is called a free black community. The community was called Birchtown, and free is a sort of a relative term, I guess. When we arrive in Birchtown, I found a dusting of snow on the ground and much more swirling about in the cold wind. About 1,000 free Negroes lived in the area. Some had shacks, but others dug deep pits in the ground, covered them up with logs and evergreen burrows, and huddled together to stay alive through the winter. Daddy Moses and his wife Evangeline had a one-room shack with a curtain down the middle. They slept in the back. The front half was where parishioners met privately with Daddy Moses. It also became my temporary sleeping quarters. Theo McCardle employed me to write advertisements for importers selling silk, tobacco, molasses, fruits, flour, duck, and rum. He gave me food to share with my host in Birchtown. But what I most liked was the chance to read the Shelburne Crier. I scoured the pages for news from other places, hoping to catch some word about Annapolis Royal or the Negroes there. But I saw no notice at all about free Negroes. Just about the only news that I read about my own people had to do with runaway slaves. $5 reward. Runaway from the subscriber on Saturday the 23rd. A Negro wench named Dinah, about 25 years of age, had on when she went away a blue and white ticking petticoat, a purple and white calico short gown, and an old blue cloak. Whoever will apprehend and secure said wench, so that the owner may have her again, shall receive the above reward with reasonable charges. Robert Sadler, Shelburne, Mowat Street, July 24, 1783. Makers of vessels and others are hereby forbid to carry off or harbor said wench, at their peril. Back in Birchtown, people told me that Dinah had indeed been caught and returned to her owner, who then whipped her. I came to understand that if you come to Nova Scotia free, you stayed free, although that didn't prevent American slave owners from sailing into town and attempting to snatch back their property. However, if you came to Nova Scotia as a slave, you were bound just as fast as our brothers and sisters in the United States. Within my first month in Birchtown, I caught 2 babies and was hired by a British group called the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. They paid me 3 shillings a week to teach people in Birchtown how to read. I gave lessons in the Methodist church, huddled around a stove with my students. I worked as much as I could to buy warmer clothes and to purchase a bear hide for my bed. I didn't have much. I had less food and fewer comforts than at any other time in my life. But I was in Nova Scotia, and I was free.
Everybody should read this book. It is such a wonderful and important book. The writing is superb. The things that you learn about Canadian history and human beings, what people can do to each other and what people can survive, it's just life-changing.
I think this is a very important book, and I believe that it should be on the high school curriculum. This is a book that we should all read. It tells a really interesting and unique part of Canadian history. In fact, Lawrence Hill has brought this corner of history into a beautifully imagined and engaging piece of historical fiction.